Hello and welcome to the Monday show via the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove and he is Aaron Stokes. Newcastle United 1-0 at the Emirates to Arsenal and saw their chance to finish second in the Premier League disappear. It was a game of what might have been with Newcastle the better side for the first half, but just unable to take their chances. The defeat means that Newcastle United go into the final day of the season not yet knowing whether they'll play Champions League football next season. It is so tight in the table with just 1 point separating third to seventh, although City still do have to play Bournemouth Tuesday before their final game against Fulham on Sunday. Newcastle, of course, play Everton at St James's Park. As always, this show is sponsored by NordVPN and Crown Trade. Thanks to them for their support. Let's get on with it. Aaron, you well?
Yeah, good weekend until about 4:30 yesterday. Enjoyed a nice Crystal Palace win on Saturday and thought, let's do the double for the weekend, but wasn't to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. What were you expecting from this game? I did expect Newcastle United to win. I was optimistic they would do.
Really?
Yeah, Arsenal in bad form. They'd not really been their old selves of late. Arteta saying very strange things, looking like he was losing the plot a little bit. The pressure of being at home. I mean, if one of those goals had gone in, I think we'd be sitting here talking about Newcastle win because I didn't see Arsenal getting back into it. It had Newcastle taking their lead. I expected them to win. To be honest,
I don't think I would say I expect them to win. I was pretty confident they would come away with something. I don't think this fixture is what it was a couple of seasons ago, where you would always sort of write off an away game at the Emirates. And obviously, we've already seen Newcastle this season go there and get a fantastic result. So I don't think I expected a win, but I certainly went down there with confidence, and I didn't, expect it to. I think the way the game panned out is frustrating. We're obviously going to talk about those very early chances and maybe not talk about too many Arsenal chances because until the goal, they sort of failed to really test Nick Pope, and I think that's what's definitely frustrated us, and it'll frustrate Eddie Howe as well.
Plenty to talk about, and we are going to look in depth at the game. But what are your initial feelings when that full-time whistle goes? Is it frustration? Is that feeling that kind of sprung from your body?
Yeah, look, I think. Look, I don't think particularly it was a very good game. I don't think it was a very good game of football. We're going to talk about the fact Newcastle United have 5 shots on target in the first 17 minutes, but what did they do after that? And I think, people will maybe look at that first 20 minutes and say Newcastle United deserved to win it. I'm not sure they did. I don't think they did enough. And I think, again, a little bit like Chelsea, it was a performance of two halves. I thought the first half they played well, had Arsenal on the ropes, but I think in these games they need a little bit more, and unfortunately they didn't offer that.
We'll go right back to the start and the team news. Alexander Isak didn't travel to the game. When that dropped, I simply messaged you saying, ha, 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 because if you don't laugh, you'll cry, right? I fully expected a bit of a meltdown on social media from certain fans because you are taking out a man who's so deadly in front of goal. But then I sat back, I reflected on the fact he wasn't there and actually thought, would it make that much of a difference? He's been so distant of late. He hasn't been his old self. And in truth, had Alexander Isak started, I'm not really sure it would have made too much of a difference. I think from elsewhere on the pitch, I don't actually think it's as big of a loss, or it was as big as a loss as maybe some people thought, simply because he hasn't been on form. And really going into this game, we're saying it's going to click. But that was more out of hope than expectation. But then Callum Wilson obviously starts and doesn't really do much. But again, did we kind of expect anything else?
I think I disagree with you. I get where you're coming from about Alexander Isak. He's obviously, we think been carrying this groin injury for a while already. Howe sort of tried to play that down a little bit. But I think you take Alexander Isak out of that team, and it's a totally different team. Where do the goals come from? We aren't seeing enough of them coming from elsewhere on the pitch. Isak, despite being pretty poor of late, has still grabbed 4 goals since the cup final. So it's not as if he's been totally useless or totally struggling. He has still been chipping in with goals, and I think we've seen already this season and in the past, he loves to terrorise Saliba. He loves playing against Arsenal. And I think, look, Callum Wilson didn't have the best of games. Yes, he might not have got the best of service, but I don't think a game like that at the Emirates, where you probably want to stretch them, is going to be a game where Callum Wilson's going to flourish. So, look, I think Alexander Isak in the team would have been a different story. Interesting, he did travel with the squad. It looked like for all he was going to start the game, he was down there in London, and it wasn't until sort of the night before the game that he said to Eddie Howe he felt something. They've sent him for a scan, Eddie Howe insists that he isn't going to need surgery this summer. We don't know whether that's just Eddie Howe maybe trying to calm the fears before the final game. And that he's fit and back in the team.
Indeed, more on Isak later in the show, but Ilkova saying here that it would have made a difference. His presence and reputation is enough to scare defenders. Wilson doesn't. And don't get me wrong, Newcastle, of course, are a worse side with Isak out injured. But if you're asking me to put a bet on who's going to score the opening goal from Newcastle point of view, based on recent weeks, I'm not picking Alexander Isak. It's kind of the point I'm making. And picture about Newcastle needing someone to replace him at times like this, because unfortunately Callum Wilson nor William Masula is that person. Rest of the team, great to see Botman in the starting 11. A lot to talk in the build-up that he might be missing, not just for this game, but for the Everton one as well. I thought he had a really good game. Didn't look too happy when he left the pitch, so hopefully that was more him being subbed and not being happy with that, rather than something that he felt when he left the pitch. But great to see him in the team. It was unchanged minus Isak. And you look at who was missing and what was at stake, it kind of does reaffirm the great job Eddie Howe has done, because you're missing Joe Linton, you're missing Kieran Trippier, you're missing Alexander Isak, big players. And yet here with Newcastle United fighting for second.
Yeah, look, obviously bigger picture, it's fantastic. I don't think we need to go over how good of a job Eddie Howe's done. We all know that it would have been pretty much a miracle if they'd finished second. Bearing in mind, how they started the season, how the season looked like it was going to unfold, maybe at the start of December. I think the subs made yesterday probably reiterate again what sort of job he's been doing. He's got one hand tied behind his back. That's no disrespect to, William Masula, Emil Kraft, Lewis Meyer, and on. But when you look at sort of, again, like we saw at Chelsea and like we saw yesterday, when you look at the two benches, it's night and day, really. Which, again, speaks to a wider point on what's going to happen this summer. Yeah, look, it's disappointing that, second's now out of reach. I think, as I was saying, last week, it would have felt even sweeter that it was Arsenal, that we would have been knocking out a second. But look, as I've said all along, I'll take fifth on goal difference as long as they get there on the final day.
Yeah, our listeners and viewers as well. Newcastle started the game out in really good fashion. Bruno nearly capitalising on a straight pass from David Raya, only for the goalkeeper to stop his effort. And I felt Bruno had a really, really good game. He was the one in the middle, pulling the strings, trying to make things happen. Most passes for Newcastle United, most touches, most key passes, and most duels won. He was up and down the pitch, and he really seems to suit these big games.
Yeah, he's ending the season really well. He's gone through patches of form this year, like like all players, but he's maybe dipped in and out of form recently. But I think he's finishing really strong. We saw that last week, especially at Chelsea. I think it was tricky circumstances for him yesterday. He did very well. It's good to see that him and Tonali have sort of, in the last two games, had to play this role together alongside each other in a two-man midfield instead of a three. And they don't look out of place. They look like they've been doing it for months, which was good to see. It's a wider point, but I'm really, really interested. And it goes back to what we're probably going to talk about with Botman, is what he does on on Sunday. Does he go for three at the back in terms of three central defenders? Does he go back to the 4-3-3? It's going to be really sort of which system he goes with for the final game.
Yeah, and we've got a few questions on that to talk about later in the show, so I'll save my opinion on that for then. And we'll get back to the action on the pitch, where Tino Livramento seeing a shot saved by Raya, and then we had Harvey Barnes forcing the keeper into another save. Then Dan Burn forces him into yet another save, probably the save of the game, and then Barnes kind of doesn't really get much contact, and it's another one off the line. And it was Newcastle's dominance on show there. Just one of those goes in. I think you are talking about a Newcastle United win, but they don't win. I don't actually think they were wasteful, though. And I've seen a lot of people on social media saying you've got to take those chances, and you do. But it's not like they were wasteful. You can't always bet on the opposition goalkeeper having a game like that, or first half like that, where the keeper has pretty much saved everything that's been thrown at him.
I wouldn't say Newcastle were wasteful. I think I was really, really buoyed by how they started the game. I thought they flew out the traps, didn't let Arsenal have a minute to breathe early on. And as we've said, inside 17 minutes, they've already tested Raya 5 times. I think, that Burn save is absolutely fantastic from close range. The Botman follow-up was great. The save earlier in the game from Bruno, the first chance, fantastic save. And even that Barnes one, it probably wasn't the best effort from Barnes, but takes a deflection and Raya's got to get down. So, he rightly got man of the match for me. But by those judging on Sky. I thought he was Arsenal's best player, and if it wasn't for him, as you say, I mean, we'll never know. But Newcastle taking an early lead there with what was at stake and how it could have been such a different story.
Well, there's no way Arsenal come back into that game if Newcastle United get one of those chances into the back of the net, but it wasn't to be. And the difficulty, Aaron, was always going to be maintaining that high standard into the second half. And we've seen this season Newcastle United tend to be a team that either plays really well for the first or second half, but can't maintain it for 90 minutes. And that goes back to the squad depth as well. If you are one of those teams that play well in the first half, then you've got to make sure you take your chances. We also know that Arsenal tend to react really well. They did last weekend as well against Liverpool. And look, if you don't make your Dubliners pay, as Newcastle United didn't do, then you always risk it coming back to bite you on the behind.
Yeah, 100%. And it did, unfortunately, for Newcastle. Again, it was a little bit like, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit like that Chelsea game last weekend where foot off the pedal. Admittedly, I thought Arsenal came out really well in the second half. They sort of started the second half like Newcastle started the first. It made it really, really difficult for them. I'm still so frustrated though that it took that goal to do it. I mean, it was a fantastic goal from Declan Rice. Nick Pope nearly gets to it, but apart from that, Newcastle must be so frustrated that they've lost it like that, despite not playing too well in the second half, despite never really looking like they were going to get back into the game. But look, is this something that Eddie Howe needs to address going forward? This fact that, I mean, this isn't a new thing. We've spoken about this on numerous occasions throughout the season. You go back to Liverpool at home in December. You go back to Brentford when they lost 4-2 down in West London. This has been a sort of a running theme this season. Do you pin it all on the squad depth or the lack of squad depth that, this is why it's happening? But it is a little bit of a concern that we're sort of seeing Newcastle play really well in the first half, but you're never too sure that they're going to kick on in the second.
I mean, without being in the dressing room at half time, it's difficult to answer that question because you would have to know what Eddie Howe's saying to the players. You'd have to know what Bruno is saying to the players. What is the message at half time? And it would be so interesting to know what words were said in the interval yesterday at the Emirates. But I think for the large part, it does come down to squad depth because it's about having the legs and having the energy. And if you've got better quality players where you can rotate and alternate your starting 11, then you have more energy in those legs to push on into a second half, whereas Newcastle United don't have that. And I think we have this season really start to see Newcastle suffer from that, whereas top teams, I mean, again, we go back to the point we make nearly every single week. If you compare the squads, this is a miracle, absolute miracle that Newcastle United are sitting third with a game to go, and all they've got to do is beat Everton. I say all they've got to do is beat Everton to qualify for the Champions League, and they've won a cup. It is an absolute miracle when you compare the players that other sides around them have got. But as you mentioned there, it did come back to bite them on the behind. Declan Rice fired home from just outside the box on the 55th minute. Great finish, but as you've alluded to, Aaron, Eddie Howe will be very, very frustrated because it comes from Newcastle United giving the ball away. Anthony Gordon, just a terrible touch. He's turned back on himself. Then the touch plays into Odegaard and finally gets across to Declan Rice, who sweeps it home. You just can't be making those mistakes in this game. What's at stake? You've got to be more focused. You've got to be better on the ball. And just watching it, so frustrated because Bruno had done his job. Because you watch that replay, Bruno stops Arsenal attacking, gets the ball out to the left, and Gordon tries to move forward. For some reason, he's either not confident, he's not switched on enough, and then Arsenal come back at Newcastle. And what it means is Bruno and Tonali out of position because they've both stepped forward, and that leaves Rice free on the edge of the box. So frustrating. I mean, I'm so angry just thinking about it, to be quite honest with you.
I don't think you're alone. I think you only have to take sort of a glance at social media the last 24 hours, and there's a lot of negativity around Anthony Gordon, not just for the mistake for the goal, which he did sort of hold his hands up straight away and apologise for, but also just for the general performance. I mean, we're still talking about a player here who isn't assured of his place in this team. If Eddie Howe does go for 4-3-3 again on the weekend, I suspect the vast swathe of Newcastle United fans would be arguing that it should be Harvey Barnes in that position rather than Anthony Gordon. Not a good day at the office for him. He is still probably looking like a player who isn't at his best. I think the last couple of weeks we've probably seen that since the Brighton sending off recently. But yeah, not good afternoon at the office for him.
I do wonder if this suspension and the injury had happened earlier in the season, whether we would see him back in the starting 11 as quickly as we have. And I know he's missed a lot of games, so that sounds daft saying the word quickly, but you get what I mean. Like, he seems to be a little bit rushed back. Maybe I look at him, I don't think he's fit. But on the other hand, Eddie Howe needs his best players in the side because of what's at stake and the limited time to get over the line. But to me, he doesn't seem right. His body language isn't right, but he doesn't seem fresh enough.
I think the only reason he's back in this team is because Kieran Trippier's injured. Because if Kieran Trippier wasn't injured and he was playing 5 at the back, he would just play Kieran Trippier at right back, and Jacob Murphy would probably still be on the right wing with Barnes on the left. It's only really since this formation change where he's sort of playing 2 alongside Isak up top that we've actually seen Gordon come in. So look, I think he's probably back in the team due to circumstance. Obviously, Joe Willock being out as well hasn't helped. And look, I'm not sitting here saying, Anthony Gordon shouldn't start. I'm not saying that. I think
I'll say it. Anthony Gordon shouldn't start against Everton.
I don't want to come across like I'm being really reactionary here, because yes, he's not in form, but I don't think it's such a wild shout that he's in this team, because one, we know how good he can be on his day, and two, Newcastle have such limited options. I've got no real issue with him starting, but he clearly isn't a player in form. He's clearly, as you say, maybe not looking 100% fit. And we know he's been nursing problems since the cup final that happened around his suspension.
A lot of people have talked about his body language on Sunday. Did you notice anything that was a little bit off? A lot of people have said just didn't look interested. He just didn't look like he could be bothered. Is that fair?
I wouldn't say I noticed it yesterday. I don't think I was looking at that game yesterday and noticing it. I've seen a lot of people talking about it on social media. I don't know. I can't put my finger on what's going wrong with him, but I don't think I'm looking at a player who's unhappy or doesn't want to be there. But if you're putting a gun to my head and saying who starts on the left on Sunday, I'm saying, well, it's 100% Scotty Howe.
Just 1 out of cost from 6 and just 17 passes all game. So it shows you how limited he was. I think we have seen little glimpses since he's returned to the starting 11 of what he can do. We've seen a few runs, a few bursts of speed, and a little bit of reminder of the player he is. And we know how good he is. For me, he's arguably the 3rd or 4th most important player in this Newcastle United squad. But right now, he feels a bit like a passenger. And I don't think you can argue with Harvey Barnes' form. And he's obviously been put out onto the right to accommodate Anthony Gordon on the left. And you're Jacob Murphy, who's also done much better than Gordon has in recent weeks. You're thinking, well, what happens when Newcastle do revert back to a 4-3-2-1, which I think they will do against Everton. And if it's for me, Gordon starts on the bench, because I also don't think he handles Everton games well at all. So I'd have him on the bench, move Barnes back over to the left, get Emil Kraft on it right back, Murphy on the right wing, and go for it like that. Bring Miley in the middle alongside Bruno and Tonali, hopefully with Isak up top. But Gordon doesn't start for me on Sunday.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with that. For me, I would revert to 4 at the back and go back to sort of the usual system against Everton. I wouldn't be playing 3 centre backs. I think Sven Botman probably needs to drop out, and I'm with you. I think it's Barnes on the left, Jacob Murphy on the right. And then, I mean, look, we're probably going to talk about it, but let's just bring it forward now. If Alexander Isak isn't fit, who gets the nod?
I mean, it will be Callum Wilson.
Should it be Callum Wilson?
No. You watch the difference. And I know Sula looked his most threatening when he went onto the right. But Sula...
Should it be Gordon? Should it be Sula?
Please, no.
No?
I'd rather it be a Sula. But we know the pecking order. It goes Wilson, Gordon, Sula up top. But Sula was, out of the 3 of them, Sula was the one that looked most threatening on Sunday against Arsenal. So, and I think as well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you say, well, do we need the discipline that maybe Wilson or Gordon get? Although Gordon at times on Sunday left Tino Livramento really badly exposed. I didn't feel he was doing his defensive duties. What happens if he starts you up top? The defensive duties a little bit different, but you've got to be pressing high on Pickford and on that defense. Or do you give it to someone a little bit unpredictable, like a Sula? And that's the balance. But we know Eddie Howe.
You won't
do that. So, if Isak's not fit, it is Callum Wilson. We all know how that probably goes, unfortunately. I did ask our viewers and listeners to get in touch regarding Anthony Gordon. And on X, I asked, does his mistake against Arsenal warrant him dropping out of the starting 11 against Everton or not. Loads of responses, overwhelmingly negative towards Anthony Gordon, or rather saying that he shouldn't start. So Chris says it's not just losing possession, he didn't look bothered or willing to track back. Gaz says, just a good game. Hopefully he hasn't, just not a good game he's had. Hopefully he doesn't have the same one against Everton. Let's hope he makes amends on Sunday and gets us into the Champions League. Grumpy old sod says the mistake doesn't, but his form should. Pardiola says if we go back to 4 at the back when the wingers should be Barnes and Murphy. Toon Loon says wasn't just the goal, he was poor all game, just walking around at the end instead of trying to close players down. We've got Sid saying he never played well against Everton and arguably tries too hard. Matt is not dropped, just move to the right and give Barnes the position back he's been playing well in. I'm not sure that would go down too well with Anthony Gordon. John says no, as I think with it being his former club, Champions League at stake, and not playing in the cup final, that will spur him on. And Ryan says, I think it was unfair on Barnes to be the one moved to the right to begin with when he had been performing well on the left. I think Barnes has a better partnership with Tino. Gordon didn't do enough graft against Arsenal, so probably yes. However, Ashley Young likely to be at right back. Thoughts on some of those comments?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with too many. I mean, the sentiment's pretty much the same on social media. If you look across the last 24 hours, a lot of people saying that about how it's Harvey Barnes being moved to the right to accommodate sort of an out of form Gordon. I mean, Harvey Barnes so rarely played on the right before he joined Newcastle, and then since Newcastle, he's only ever been used really as a left winger. So it's a new position for him as well. Anthony Gordon's so much more natural on that wing, and yet Eddie Howe's decided not to do it.
Let us know in the comments your thoughts on Anthony Gordon. We've got YI Man here saying, I think Gordon gets criticised more as he is high profile. Just think the team is a bit disjointed at the minute. And the big post missing for me is Joe Linton. Let's just talk about the subs, because you mentioned it earlier in the show, and I think it very telling, although it's not really telling us anything we didn't know, i.e. Newcastle need to make waves in the summer transfer window. But bringing William Asula on, Emil Kraft and Lewis Miley, you look at the bigger picture and it just shows you the depth or lack of that Eddie Howe has in his squad. Asula and Miley, huge potential. I thought both did very well when they came on. We know the qualities that Kraft has, but the squad is not built for a top 5 finish, and that's exactly where they deserve to be. Reaffirms what they need in the summer. The injury to Alexander Isak also reaffirms that they need to go out and get a striker, as well as a defender, winger, and maybe another full-back. And once again, it just reminds you of the great job Eddie Howe was doing with his squad.
Yeah, 100%. Joe Willock as well, another player who came off the bench who we haven't really mentioned to. Again, probably didn't set the world alight or do
should
much.
have got with level.
Yeah, creates the chance well himself, but then obviously can't do anything with it. Look, another game where it sort of passed him by. I think for a player who's, as we've talked about in previous weeks, who's so close to being able to just sort of nail down that spot in Jolinton's absence. He hasn't had the best 4 or 5 game spell, has he, since coming back in the team? Injuries aside,
when you see those numbers go up on the touchline, it's Asula, it's Miley, it's Kraft. What are you thinking?
Look, I mean, Emil Kraft's really tidy operator. I think he always does a good job. Lewis Miley's got bags of potential, but look, I don't think in games like that, Lewis Miley and Will Asula are going to come on, and Emil Kraft as well, and really change things. And as you've touched on, I wouldn't disagree that again just highlights how sort of lacking in depth Newcastle are.
Move back to 4 at the back, and they seem to come into the game a little bit more. Let's talk about Lewis Miley, because I really thought he was excellent. I thought he was a really calming influence in the middle when things were maybe starting to get away from Newcastle United. Just deft little touches here or there, picking the right pass, not afraid to go back or sideways if need be, keeping up with play as well. He's a very, very young man, but I did think he stood out a little bit.
Yeah, look, I think every time he's came into this team, and I feel for him a little bit in the Premier League because he's coming in for really short cameo appearances, but he doesn't, rarely put a foot wrong. He's looking more at home at this level, despite his age and despite the fact he's had such limited game time this season, which I'm sure he isn't probably too happy about. For me, as we've touched on earlier, I think I would be starting him on Sunday. Again, we probably say this on a Monday, knowing full well that Eddie Howe probably won't. I think out of the two of them, it probably will be Joe Willock that gets a nod if he goes back to 3 in the middle. But I think he's earned it. I think, give him the chance on the final day. So much at stake at home with the crowd behind him to really showcase what he can do, as we've already seen in the Premier League, not just this season, but last as well. So I hope Eddie Howe, if he does go back to three in the middle, goes for Miley over Willock.
I think he has to. I think you watch both those players yesterday against Arsenal, and only one man really stood out. Willock had the best chance to get Newcastle United level, a great turn, but then fires it high and wide, should have scored. But the overall play, Miley was the one that just seemed to get a little bit of control back in the centre of the park when the game was certainly getting away from Newcastle United. As you mentioned there, Willock with that chance. Newcastle really pushed and tried their best to get into the game, but just couldn't do it. And it was a real shame, because you feel like if Willock gets that goal, the momentum changes. But as we say, high and wide. I mean, what did you think about the last 10, 15 minutes of the game?
Look, I think Newcastle sort of grew into the game in the second half as it went on. I think as Arsenal sort of had to defend the lead in the final stages, you could tell Newcastle had sort of wrestled a little bit of control back. But look, the statistics speak for themselves. Newcastle didn't have a shot on target after the 17th minute. It showed you that, while they were maybe huffing and puffing, they were never really looking like getting back in the game. I'll be totally honest, from the last 15 minutes, there wasn't any part of me that thought, okay, I'm confident Newcastle are going to fully get back into this.
No,
no, not really. I don't think so. I think you could just tell the way the game was going. Newcastle didn't have enough in attack, and Arsenal were, I thought, pretty comfortable by the end.
I thought towards the end, Arsenal looked a little bit desperate, to be honest. I was punching and scrapping about in the air. And just a little bit frustrating that they did manage to get more balls into the box and really pack the box, because as good as he did in the opening 15, 20 minutes, he didn't look confident coming out for the crosses. And I really felt Arsenal were there, actually. For the take, it might be a bit strong, but I don't think they're a great side. I really, really don't think. And if that's the standard Newcastle are aiming for, I think they're 2-3 players away from easily reaching that level. Liverpool are a total different conversation, but I look at that Arsenal performance yesterday, they're nothing to be afraid of. They win, Arteta's buzzing, the crowd are buzzing, they finished second, congratulations, another year without a trophy. But I don't think the levels are too far apart at all. I think Newcastle United are pretty much on Arsenal's doorstep, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I don't think the gulf is too big, as obviously we saw by the fact Newcastle would have leapfrogged them on Sunday had they won. Not to sound like one of those, painful Arsenal fans on Twitter, but they have had a lot of injuries this season. I'm not saying they would have ran Liverpool close, but I think they would have got a lot closer without those injuries, especially to the likes of Saliba and Gabriel. But on the wider point, I don't think Newcastle United are too far off this team. I think when you put them together and maybe make a little combined 11, I think you'd probably get just as many, if not more, Newcastle players in there than Arsenal.
Do you think it was better to lose in the manner they did yesterday, where they played really well in the first half, struggled in the second half to break Arsenal down, but they weren't embarrassed? They were in the game, rather than getting thumped 3 or 4-0 and going into Sunday knowing that you have to win, but you're in really bad spirits because you've had your backside handed to you.
Yeah, 100%. I think the big thing I took away, and I was thinking about last night after the game, as I mentioned at the very start of the show, even under Eddie Howe last season and the season before, not even we're talking about Steve Bruce or Rafa here, I was writing games away at Arsenal off because I thought this is such a horrible ground for them to go to. The gulf was much bigger back then. But I think Eddie Howe is getting much better at playing these teams away from home. We saw how well he executed the plan in the Carabao Cup semi-final at the Emirates. We've seen it again at Anfield. We've seen it at Etihad. I think they're getting much better in these big teams. They've still got a way to go, and I still don't think I'd be going to the Etihad confident that they're going to win. But I'm not writing any game off now under Eddie Howe, and I think that's because he's getting better at trying to execute his plan against these teams away from home.
And that's half the battle, isn't it? It's in the mind, in the build-up to the games, to the journey, on the journey to these stadiums where you used to fear it, and now you don't. And, I think you tactically got it right yesterday. It was just the fact that they couldn't put the ball in the back of the net. That Raya had a really good afternoon or good half an hour. But you're right, you go into these games feeling comfortable now. That's a really good thing. And I think we've also seen Eddie Howe evolve as a manager as well. He's feeling more confident in the way he sets up his players. While, under Benitez or Steve Bruce, it was kind of damage limitation right from the first whistle. You get the sense here that Eddie Howe believes in his players. And we saw that in the opening 20 minutes where they were the better side and should have won this game. And that's why we're frustrated, because we're sitting here thinking what might have been. And look, this has been 6 months ago. we'd have been saying, what a performance, what a brilliant performance. And we're still saying that, but we're saying it a little bit quieter because of what's at stake on Sunday, which is, of course, Newcastle needing the win to get to the Champions League.
I think, I don't know if it was last season or the season before, Newcastle got thumped at the Emirates 4-0 by Arsenal in the league, and it was probably one of the worst performances under Eddie Howe. And I think you would have never seen anything like we saw in the first 25 minutes yesterday against Arsenal on their own patch, a season or two ago. So it's progression. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm happy that we got beat 1-0, but I think there was signs of improvement there, certainly against the bigger teams away from home.
Well, positives, loads of positives to take into that game against Sunday, and Eddie Howe had a list of them as well to share with the media.
My mood is always the same after we lose. I'm disappointed, I'm frustrated, and it takes me time to sort of get out of that way of thinking. I think I will look back with positivity from the game, though I know I will, because there was so much good to take from it. Yeah, I think when you then look on to the next game, and we know what we have to do, and it's not going to be easy, but our home form's been strong. We've really enjoyed playing there. The players are used to big games. There'll be none bigger than this, and I'm sure the Newcastle supporters will make it an unbelievable atmosphere for us.
So a few points there. It goes back kind of to the original question I asked you about losing in the manner they did rather than getting absolutely thumped. And I think that kind of forms maybe some of the team talk on Sunday. It's like, if you play this way against Everton, as you did down the Emirates for the first 20 minutes, and just get the ball in the back of the net, you will be playing Champions League football next season.
Yeah, look, I think 100% if they can replicate what they did in the first half. But I think it's different. I think, not to tempt fate, but Newcastle at home are such a different animal. I don't think there will need to be much motivation or inspiration. Newcastle know what they need to do. I think the crowd will be willing them on from well before kick-off. And look, if this game was at Goodison Park, I'd be terrified. But the fact is, at St James, I'm feeling pretty calm about it. I'm feeling pretty calm because we know the permutations. We know that I think Newcastle can avoid winning, and they can still obviously do it. So there's a lot of things in their favour. The first 25-30 minutes of yesterday's game certainly adds to the positives. But I'm confident heading into Sunday.
We should be, with no disrespect to Everton, and we will have the match preview with John Gibson later in the week. Newcastle United chasing the Champions League, going up against a mid-table Everton side who've been battling for safety up until a few months ago. Obviously the change of manager, Moyes has come in. They are very good at getting draws. They've won the last two in the Premier League. But if we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of it, Newcastle United chasing Champions League football, this is a type of game that you should be winning with your eyes closed.
If somebody had given you, even a couple of months ago at the start of the season, say, right, you've got a one-game shootout against Everton at home on the final day to secure your Champions League football, you would take it 100%. So, I think, as I've mentioned there, Everton, absolutely nothing to play for. Win, lose, or draw, they're finishing 13th. I think, I feel like watching those scenes yesterday at Goodison Park, I felt like it was their final game of the season, not just at home. Now, adding all that together, Newcastle now just need to do the job that we know they can do and get over the line.
Well, this is the table. Is it going to show up? Here we go. Newcastle in third, 66 points. Chelsea in fourth, 66 points. Aston Villa in fifth on 66 points. Man City sixth on 65 with a game in hand. And Nottingham Forest down in seventh on 65 points. It is so tight. Man City do play Bournemouth on Tuesday before facing Fulham. Now, because Palace won the FA Cup, that's changed the European places slightly. And I think it comes down to Chelsea having to finish outside of the top six and then winning the Europa Conference League for eighth to be a European spot. I think the same goes for Newcastle. If they finish outside of the top six as well, their conference spot will become eighth, I think, or something like that. But things have changed slightly. But the fact is, Bournemouth and Fulham still have something to play for, however small the chances are. So it's not going to be a case of City just rocking up and winning. How do you foresee the race for third, fourth, fifth going?
Look, I think City will probably beat Bournemouth. Although saying that, they were, I thought they were pretty poor in the FA Cup final.
We're not very good against Southampton either.
Yeah, so So let's just say City win. Let's just on the balance probability that takes them to what 65, 68. Sorry. Look, Newcastle just need to do their job, don't they?
That's what it comes down
They need
to,
to
isn't
win,
it?
and if they win, no one can take it away from them. They've got so much going in their favour, as I say, home advantage, that goal difference, the fixture. It's going to be fascinating. It's so tight.
Is it squeaky bum time?
Oh, massively, yeah.
And the key question, as we've briefly discussed already, is about Alexander Isak. Will he start or not on Sunday? Newcastle have got a very, very poor record without him. It's not at the stage of can't win without Bruno levels, which was pretty bad, but it's getting towards that. They don't score goals without him. He's so important to what Newcastle United do. Aaron, before I get a bit more from you on Alexander Isak, let me just play you this clip from Eddie Howe regarding Isak and whether he'll be fit, and also kind of this bad record that we speak about.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one to sort of go too deep into that, because the standard of our performance today with him missing was still really, really strong. We did create chances. We did look really good in almost every phase in that first half. Yes, the final action, which is he is probably better than anyone at, or has been this season. I think he's been a brilliant finisher for us. But unfortunately, from Callum's viewpoint, none sort of fell to him. It was more, I think Bruno had a big one and Harvey's had his shot, and then of course set plays were a big threat for us. But it was a really strong performance in his absence. I think that has to be the confidence lift that we need when you review this game.
Do you agree with Eddie Howe there? You look upon the chances that Newcastle United created, and that gives you positivity going into Sunday, even without Alexander Isak?
Yeah, look, 100%. I think, as we've touched on, they did actually start the game well without that attacking presence there on Sunday. The only sort of slight worry for me is the fact that, Callum Wilson doesn't look anywhere near the level he once was. He doesn't look like, he's got it in him anymore. Willis, as we touched on, probably won't get the opportunity to show what he can do. Anthony Gordon, hasn't looked the same player through the middle when used there from time to time this season. So you would feel a lot more confident if Newcastle United had, sort of fit and firing and comfortable backup to replace him. They don't have that at the minute. Newcastle will wait and see. They'll assess Isak again through the week. Hopefully he can play, and then they can wrap him up for a couple of months.
What does your gut tell you? Is he playing on Sunday? Is he starting?
Yeah, I think as we sit here on Monday afternoon, obviously we've only heard Eddie Howe 24 hours ago talking about it. But because of sort of how late he pulled out and Eddie Howe trying to play down the severity, I think we might see him on Sunday. But I wouldn't be alarmed if Eddie Howe doesn't really answer the question on Friday, because he didn't about Sven Botman, and we all sort of got a little shock when he started on Sunday, which I think was part of the game plan. I think he'll start on Sunday.
Interesting, isn't it? Because if there is this issue with the groin, and Eddie Howe, as Aaron's already said, says it's not an operation that he's needing, he just needs to strengthen it to avoid these issues that he's got with it. But you feel like on Sunday, a big part of Newcastle's game plan is going to be that intensity. It's going to be, getting in the face of Pickford, getting in the face of the defenders. And you look at Callum Wilson, he doesn't look too sure that he can push himself to really move at speed. And I would be worried about Isak as well, because, we know that if you run at speed and you've got a dodgy groin, there's a good chance it's going to go. And you don't want that in the first 4 or 5 minutes where you're trying to chase the ball down and all of a sudden you're on the turf.
You wouldn't, but I go back to last weekend at Chelsea, the last time we saw Alexander Isak, and I actually, as I said on last week's show, I didn't look at him and think that's a player who's injured or a player who was holding back. He was pressing from the front. He was chasing down those loose balls. He was making runs into the channel. So I don't think, or I certainly haven't thought the last week or two that he's looked like a player with a groin problem. We know this is nothing new for Alexander Isak. He's had groin problems ever since he's came to Newcastle. That is why there's been so much speculation that this summer he will have the operation to finally fix it. Eddie Howe, obviously, as of now, saying he doesn't think that's going to be necessary. Look, if Alexander Isak is fit to play Sunday, he will. They won't take any risks with him. If he isn't fit, that's when maybe it starts to become a little bit more squeaky bum time than it is at the minute.
Toon Army 1 says, I think Isak was rested as precaution, just like Howe did for the Liverpool away game. He should be hopefully fit. Botman has to start against Everton. Burn at left back, Botman centre back, Sherwood centre back with Tino on the right. move Dan Burn over to the left?
No, I don't think so.
Not for me. I think him and Shea have got a good partnership, and I know Botman has impressed. You certainly impressed me.
Botman can't last 90 minutes at the minute, can he? So
yeah, I think Kraft will do a good job in a 4 against Everton, and Tino looks better left back at the moment than he does right back. So I wouldn't be switching Tino away from that left hand side, and who knows, we might even get to see Kieran Trippier. I'm just looking at the rest of the comments here. Ricardo says, I'm nervous about Sunday. We are strong at home, but we need a managed situation, which means maximising every controllable. How we'll be working his backside off this week, essentially, is what he said there. Let us know your thoughts about Sunday. What are you expecting? Darren says, if City lose tomorrow, but I can only see them winning that, meaning they only need a point next Sunday. We've got a few questions sent in from our viewers and listeners. Thank you very much for doing so. We've got one from Eric who says, hello guys, love the pod, keep up the great work. Had a thought and wanted your opinion on it. Do you think that missing out on Europe this season was a blessing in disguise? Had Man City beaten Man United at the end of last season, we would have had a Europa Conference League campaign this season. Looking at the competition, it is fair to say I think we would have gone far. Given how stretched thin our squad is, do you really think we would have won the Carabao Cup and be within a good shout of qualifying for the Champions League? I imagine we would have struggled with even more injuries throughout the season, had to rotate more for the Cups, and given how tight the race for Europe is, I think we probably would have ended up being mid-table. Was missing out on the Conference League this season actually a good thing? And that's from Eric.
it's a good point. Yeah, I think the point he makes there about the Carabao Cup, I mean, could you really see this Newcastle squad? I mean, we've already spoke about it in this episode and the lack of depth. Could they really have gone and fought on 4 fronts? Probably not. Would we probably have seen a little bit more spending last summer? Yes. I would agree with that point that it was probably a blessing, but then I also think Newcastle probably could have won that Conference League this season. Bear in mind how easy Chelsea have walked it to get to the final. But yeah, I think sitting here now, third at Carabao Cup, you would probably take that over a Conference League, would you? Conference League in mid-table? Or a Carabao Cup in third?
Yeah, take the situation we're definitely now over the other one. Let us know in the comments. The other email comes in from, it is a long one, from Nick over in Minnesota in the USA. So thank you very much, Nick, for taking the time to email in. He says you can paraphrase my question, and I'm going to have to do that because it's about 12 paragraphs long. He says, why are we continually falling into the trap of discussing big-name acquisitions for Newcastle when it doesn't appear to make sense for us to do so on so many levels? He wants Newcastle United to follow the Borussia Dortmund model of buy, train, and sell. He says, isn't the writing on the wall? Are we all just pretending to focus on big names because that's easier than explaining the long-term approach? Because truly, if we buy 3 names at massive outlays and salaries this summer, that's probably us done, and we'd still be short-handed. So he's saying, basically he's asking the question, are Newcastle United really going to go out and sign 3 top-quality players this summer?
I wish I had a crystal ball to answer that. No, I do get his point. Look, you know, the big complaint about Newcastle this season is the depth, isn't it? We look at that start 11 and it's pretty squad and it's pretty strong in about 90% of the positions. And you do think, oh, well, you know, if they just had a little bit more extra in reserve, that'd be brilliant. But equally, I think, as we've just touched on, they're so close to a team like Arsenal, and you know, dare I say it, you know, they're going to be targeting Premier League titles in the next couple of years. This squad isn't going to, you know, challenge for a Premier League title next season unless they go out and really do sign 3 top quality additions. So I get the argument to maybe, you know, not spend big on a couple of players and spread the money and get depth in and sign young players and train them up. We've seen what they're doing with the youth squad anyway. They're going to try and get those players through the door nice and cheap early and work them up in the under-21s, which they've been doing. But I think this summer they really do need that bit of quality. They need the Isak, Tonali signings of that quality in certain positions on the right at centre-back to truly take them to the next level in the short term.
I 100% agree. I think Newcastle United are at a crossroads in this project, and it is about buying big this summer, adding those key players to take them to the next level. It's all good buying youngsters and bedding them in and then watching them come to the front in 3 or 4 years' time, but I don't think Newcastle United are in a position where they can do that. I think you do that, and it sounds bit silly saying it, because these youngsters might cost you, 15-20 million pounds. I mean, look at the price tags on Lewis Hall and Tina Livramento when they arrived at the club, but they took a year to get to where they are. And in many ways, you're kind of going backwards in a way, because you're having to wait for those to become this player to flower. And what you want is someone who is ready and can hit the ground running. You want Brian Burmo through the door, because you put him in black and white next season, instantly that right wing is just gone up a level. He scored again over the weekend, and the same with a striker. Now, there's different levels. Do you go for someone, as we mentioned a few weeks ago, who's hitting big in Belgium, for instance, who would cost less than, say, Jonathan David's wage and that big sign-on fee? It's about getting the balance. It's about prioritising what Newcastle United need, and everyone's going to have different opinions on that. And also, Aaron, it's actually about what is considered elite. Is Brian Burmo considered elite to you? I mean, I think that's the key. To some he will be, to some he won't be, and it's about what the owners deem being elite, I think.
Yeah, I get the point. I think I also get the emailer's point as well about the money that it's going to cost, and whether it's the right course of action. But I think, as you say there, someone like Mbeumo coming in, and that right wing position sorted. I hate to say it, because Fabian Schär has been such an ever-present, but if you go and sign someone like Mark Gay or Huijsen, I know he's going to Madrid, but a player of that level, they are going to come in and they are going to be starting, and they're going to raise the level of this squad. And I think, as I say, in the short term, I think that's where Newcastle need to be aiming for.
I can see Newcastle United definitely trying to go back in for Mark Gay, but now they've got European football. I think that might be a little bit difficult. But I could also see the biggest outlet being on someone like Brian Mbeumo or Anthony Elanga, and then they go out to Europe and sign that right-sided centre-back. Maybe even do what Bournemouth did with Howson, and go to someone like Juventus, where you haven't heard of these players or you don't know too much about them. To spend 15-20 million pounds on someone that you've scouted and you've watched, you've done your homework on, but us as fans and journalists maybe don't know too much about it, and then watch them flourish, but knowing they can do it straight away like he did. And then maybe up front, you probably don't spend as much as maybe others would like. There's going to have to be clever numbers. That's not an endless pot to spend. But they are going to spend big. And Eddie Howe alluded to that, didn't he, in the press conference on Friday, where he kind of said in so many words, we haven't got the restrictions that we had of 2 or 3 seasons ago, which is exciting for Newcastle United, but it doesn't mean there's no room for errors. Okay, the restrictions aren't as bad as they were, but you've still got to get it spot on. You can't be like a Manchester United, signing a player and a year later trying to move him on and being able to write it off. Newcastle can't do that.
Yeah, 100%. I think it was really telling the week before, Eddie Howe talked about having sort of those lack of restrictions. He spoke about how they want to take advantage of their teams now that they're not in the PSR situation that they found themselves in 12 months ago. Do they then look to a Villa? They know Villa need to sell. They know Manchester United and Chelsea and teams like that need to sell. And they're going to go out and try and take advantage of them as well, which is obviously going to help their cause.
Indeed. I mean, just quick look at the relegated sides. I mean, do you think Newcastle United could go shopping in that market? Obviously, Liam Delap strongly linked to Manchester United. You could probably see him going there. But I mean, do you look at any other players from Southampton, Ipswich, or Leicester and think they could do a job for Newcastle?
Not really. I think out of the 3 teams that's gone down, Delap's obviously the standout one because of the goals he scored this season. As you've just alluded to, that it looks like Manchester United might have won the race for that. And there's also going to be a lot of teams in the mix for him with that £30 million release clause. I mean, yeah, look, you've got Southampton up there. You'd probably say Diblin. I've seen there's obviously been a lot of talk about Ramsdale, but is he really an upgrade on Mick Pope? I'm not too sure. Harwood Bellis, but again, is he really the centre back that's going to take you at the next level? I think there's limited numbers I'd take. Diblin's probably the one from Southampton, but it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, and I don't think he's the finished product yet by any stage, as you'd expected someone who's obviously 18. You? Leicester, Southampton?
No, there's no one that really jumps out. To be quite honest, I hope Newcastle don't go anywhere near Aaron Ramsdale. If I'm being totally honest, I mean, Harwood Bellis wouldn't be the worst signing. I think, is it Graves at Ipswich as well, I think can do a job, although I think he's a left-sided centre-back, but I think he's got real potential. But these are kind of the signings that you might bring in to build a squad rather than to have a first-team impact. I think that's what Newcastle United need more than anything, is a first-team impact. And then you can look to bring in players for lesser value who can add, and that building block to a squad. But right now, the priority has to be on players who come in and instantly demand a place in the first team, because it's been so long without that. Obviously, Tonali being the example, but that was two summers ago now. So Eddie Howe obviously wants those players in. The board want those players in, and hopefully we can see them in early.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as we touched on, I mean, the transfer window opens in 11, 12 days. I know it's only briefly at the start of June, but hopefully an opportunity to get those players in the first 10 or 11 days of the month and start pre-season off on a roll.
Let us know in the comments if there's any players from either Southampton, Ipswich or Leicester that you would like to see in Newcastle United, and indeed who your top summer target is. Would you like Newcastle to go back in for Mark Gee? Is Mbeumo your main man? Let us know and I'll get back to you guys. Aaron, time for the trivia?
Yeah, I feel like it might have been a trivia that we've done before, because we've done these for a couple of months and they played Arsenal not too long ago. So I think it's time when the new season starts to find a new bit of trivia. But we'll go with the tried and
Can't be
trusted
many.
measure. There's only 5. And I'm sure we've done this before, but we'll do it again. There's 5 who've played for Arsenal and who've played for Newcastle.
Johan Cabaye wishes he was on this
no
list.
Johan Cabaye on the list, unfortunately.
But his good pal was Matthew Debussy.
Yeah. Solid start.
Mikel Merino.
Yeah, unfortunately couldn't play yesterday.
Sol Campbell.
Yeah.
So and then two left.
And the 2 left are both on Newcastle's books at the minute.
Isaac Hayden.
Yeah.
Where's he at? QPR on loan, is he?
He has been at Portsmouth, but he's on his way back. He's still got another year on his deal, Isaac Hayden.
That's crack. Is
he the midfield cover they need next season?
Potentially.
And yeah, the last one, I'm surprised he didn't get this one first, because he's literally in and around Eddie Howe's first team.
In and around Eddie Howe's first team.
Played yesterday.
Oh, so when you do this, it's really stupid. Oh,
Came off the bench.
Sell him. No, Joe Willock.
There we go.
Should have scored, Joe. Should have scored. You could have had your own thumbnail for this episode if you put that in the back of the minute. But thank you to you guys for watching and listening. Thank you to our sponsors, NordVPN and Crowntrade. This is the final Monday show of the season because it's bank holiday next.
Yeah, is it the Tuesday show?
We'll be doing the Tuesday show, won't we? Because it's bank holiday Monday. So hopefully next time you see me now and together, we'll be celebrating Champions League qualification. I have to put you on the spot now. It's going to happen, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
100%.
100%.
Look how confident he is. It's going to be a wonderful, shaking his hand. It's going to be a wonderful afternoon at St. James's Park, 4 p.m. kickoff. I'm sure the atmosphere will be absolutely buzzing. We know you guys have a huge role to play in that. You don't need us to tell you that. Hopefully the atmosphere helps the lads get over the line. Newcastle United do indeed beat Everton, and Jordan Pickford doesn't have that Hollywood ending that I fear that he might do. Yep,
no dinosaurs in the crowd, please.
Yes, that's
no
not
chance
about it. We'll come back to bite us in the behind. But Newcastle are going to do it. They're going to be playing Champions League football next season. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I mean, I will be back on Tuesday.